You are not immune to propaganda or ChatGPT. A few days ago, fans of Hank Green's noticed something interesting about one of his scripts. It sounded oddly AI generated, and so people called him out on it. And to some of our surprise, he came out and said that it was true, that he had used ChatGPT, and that in fact, his LLM usage was a big problem in his life to the degree that his wife and brother brought it up to him. Yesterday, I posted a video where I was talking about this issue, explaining how I could understand how Hank Green could end up in this situation. Hank Green announced that he is taking a break from the internet because he is overly reliant on ChatGPT. I think that this can be explained via scams. And in the comments, one thing came up over and over again. Does this explain the SciShow knitting controversy? And not only did I not say all the stuff I wanted to say about this in that video, because it's only a minute and a half, but there are a lot of responses to those videos that I specifically want to dig into, because I think a lot of people have been misinterpreting or misremembering a lot of the facts of this prior case of the SciShow knitting incident. So I want to return to that video. I want to dig into his statement, because a lot of people are asking the same question. Did knitters a year ago send up the flare that Hank Green was using AI? And does his AI confession mean that we actually can't trust any of the science information he's been putting out in recent months? Last year, SciShow put out a video that was talking about physics and knitting. A lot of people had a lot of issues with it. I've gone back and rewatched the video now, though they have deleted it. I went back and watched it through this creator's video, because as I was also reading a lot of comments, I was seeing things from this controversy that I lived through only 10 months ago that I didn't remember as being part of it. Someone in my comments said that there were AI generated photos of knitting, and that was the problem. So I went back to it myself. If you don't know the context, in this SciShow video about knitting and physics, oh, and I can't believe I forgot to mention this, but the point of the video was that a research study had come out from physicists explaining the physics of knitting in the curl of the patterns, because some stitches are naturally want to fold this way or that way, that they created a system to be able to understand reliably how something would knit up. To make shapes that could work for packaging and for other stuff and sound cancellation, those sorts of things. There were a lot of red flags that came up specifically for people in the fiber arts community who know better. There were a lot of creators who explained in depth what those issues are, so I'm not going to rehash them. Please go watch their videos. But here is a highlight reel. They made a lot of technical mistakes that anyone who has any experience with knitting would be able to spot. Things like saying that stitches are knots, saying that there are only really two kinds of stitches when we have also increases and decreases, using a picture of the wrong kind of stitch pattern, things of that nature. But I would say the bigger issue that a lot of people had was with the tone. And the tone was one that sort of uplifted physics, technology, all those sort of things, and that, whether intentionally or unintentionally, played into a lot of the stereotypes around women's work and diminishing the sort of skill, ability, and technology and development that it takes to be able to even develop knitting as a practice in the first place, let alone the impact that having fabric has had on the world at large. Used a lot of oversimplified language, talking about a sock as just being like a simple tube with a heel. And anyone who has ever knit a sock will tell you that turning a heel is one of the hardest things you can do. And the problem with this tone and being like knitting was more of an art than a science. They didn't understand how these things worked until the physicists came around. It's just condescending, even when not said in that condescending tone I just added. Because first of all, it completely sidelines the entire history of knitting and technology. Fiber arts and tech have been deeply entwined since their inception. Not only is fiber arts a technology that was a significant factor in the development of every civilization, weaving machines were the first mechanical computers. Binary is coming from looms. Which means that, in fact, it's not that knitters learned a lot from physics. Physicists learned a lot from fiber artists. Not to mention, knitting takes so much math. It requires so much math. If you're going to do anything, if you're going to make a pattern on your own, you need to have math. I didn't even think I liked math, but I use it so much in my day-to-day life when I'm trying to determine how many inches I need this to expand by if I'm gonna make something. But there are also so many scientists who are knitters and fiber artists and crocheters And talking about it in this way also erases those people who sit at the intersection of the Venn diagram, including, I'm assuming, the very physicists who made this algorithm in the first place. Because why else would you as a physicist be like, I need to figure out how this works. This could be a solution to many problems I personally have, like there being not enough wrapping paper and too much noise. And so I can understand where a lot of people became frustrated at this point. For the record, I was also frustrated.
It's making it sound like knitting and science is this like new collab, when this is not the case in the slightest.
Because it's just the same thing we hear all the time. Women's accomplishments are sent by the wayside. It's an art when women do it, and it's technology when men do it. That sort of energy. A lot of people blame Hank Green for this directly, as he was the CEO and the host saying the words that were on the screen. I see a lot of people talking about this as though he wrote the video, produced it directly, and that those were his thoughts and feelings. As was said in the apology statements that they put out after the fact, there is an entire team behind SciShow. It's not just Hank Green anymore. As the CEO, he is responsible. But did he actually write the script? Pretty sure the answer is no. I had a faint recollection that the script was written by two women, in fact, but I can't seem to find any screenshots from the now deleted video that corroborate that. And could he have written that script with AI if he didn't write it? Obviously not. As we're about to see in the statement, he does claim that Complexly, SciShow's parent company, does have very specific AI policies. Does that mean that the people involved weren't using it to write stuff and that could explain some of the silliness? It could, but that doesn't mean that it does. You've got to get to a point where you trust your team. So if the entire team makes a slip up like that, then of course, that's like your responsibility to handle as the CEO. As CEO, you might just, trusting your team, come in, film the video, and leave. Not expecting there to be massive backlash, not feeling they need to fact check things because you're not the one that's doing all of that maintenance. Not every single video, I would imagine, is going through like 24 layers of fact checking, which of course is an issue in itself when you're creating science content that is inaccurate, but the culpability is shared among the team. As the CEO, Hank Green is responsible for the content that gets put out on that channel, but in the same way that a parent is responsible for disciplining their child when they act up at the playground. And in this example, parents are also blamed for their child's bad behavior, but they are also responsible for that bad behavior because of not having disciplined them enough before going to the playground. But just like it's the parent's responsibility to make sure that their child knows the lessons that they need to learn before going to the playground to avoid the child having a breakdown there, Hank Green does have a responsibility to make sure that things are staying accurate at SciShow. I totally agree that people should criticize SciShow for having made this mistake in the first place and criticize Hank Green for having allowed it to get to that point. We can't go around saying Hank Green wrote the video, it was AI generated, knitting photos, stuff like that. So, on to the more recent controversy. Hank Green put out a statement saying that he had been using AI as a part of preparing his content, and that he had received so much dopamine from talking to LLMs that his wife, his brother, and himself acknowledged that it was unhealthy, bad for him, and bad for the world. I also want to dig into what the specific statement said. In response to the video that had been called out for an AI-generated script, said, I produced this under a ton of pressure, so I went and checked my process from start to finish. I did use ChatGPT for research on this script, and watching it, I definitely get an AI feel, so I think it's fair to say I was relying too much on generated notes. That's a thing I've been doing, and it's a bad habit at a time when I've overcommitted myself. But I just went to the notes in the script for this, and neither contained the I appreciate the pushback line, which people had said sounded very AI-like, the AI had been responding to his prompt. So that particular moment was an ad-lib reference to my guest pushing back on me, saying that words are purely made up. So notice, in this response, he uses ChatGPT for research on this script, that he was generating notes, and that it contributed enough for it to sound like AI. Later, he makes an apology that is much longer that says, thanks to start, I'm mortified and I have let so many people down, and I think I understand how that happened. I'm going to change things about how I make stuff. Complexly's AI policy is public and well considered and adhered to by the whole team. I think it's worth reading. Complexly is the nonprofit that makes Crash Course and SciShow and a bunch of other shows that I do not write for. The thing that we do is based on everyone saying my thoughts are coming from my brain the way I decide. I've made that harder and I'm sorry. I've been relying too heavily on AI as a research aid. It can be very useful for the task, giving me access to a lot of papers I didn't know existed really fast. but I think that this has been to the detriment of my work because it has not given me the freedom to find all of my ways into and around a topic. But for clarity, the origins of the claims in my video are not ChatGPT said this. I have been using AI to locate papers and other resources for learning about topics. You are still getting my takes based on what I read, know, and learn. So in this instance, he's saying that what he has generated is a list of research papers. I would imagine that based on his scientific acumen, that he is then at least going to read those papers. He's just using AI to find them and then generate notes about them, which still does not sound great. But that ultimately still the arguments are centrally his and not ChatGPT's. It does make me wonder where these notes are coming from. If he's then taking, those sort of like one-off phrases that you tend to write down when you're reading a paper for things you want to remember later. He's then taking those and generating them into a script, because otherwise, how is he getting to the point where he's then reading this out loud? He doesn't say specifically anything else to that effect. He said, I think what people have said in this thread about me diluting myself is spot on. Ultimately, what I am most scared of is ruining myself for people, but I have not been managing my impulses well. You need to know that my words are mine. I don't think that this hasn't been true, but I've been moving so fast that my own process isn't actually clear to me, and I want it to be a guarantee moving forward. He goes on to say, but mostly I need to come to terms with the fact that the level of dopamine I've been getting from interacting with LLMs, with doing more and more and more and more, is not healthy for me or good for the world. It is careless, and it has disconnected me from where people are on this. I was talking about this with Catherine, wife, last night, and she did not pull any punches. Frankly, neither did John, brother. Neither of them think I've been being healthy and I need to readjust. And so he says that he's going to leave and, we'll be coming back later. So do we need to think more critically about Hank Green's scientific knowledge or about the content that he's put out? I would say in general, yes, absolutely. I think that we as a society end up getting into an expert bias. As long as somebody is perceived to be an expert, we'll sort of look at them uncritically and just take everything that they say at face value. We forget when it comes to people online that we like and are interested in that we still need to be doing our own research, fact-checking, and doing all those sorts of other things before verifying a claim. But nobody likes doing that. We like reading the headline and telling our mom at lunch. But is there actually evidence here to suggest that he's been putting hallucinated information out onto the internet? I don't know. I think that's a little bit tougher of a question than a lot of people are making it out to be. If you're using notes that you already have to generate scripting for a piece of content, then you probably have a pretty good idea as to whether or not the claims that are made in the AI-generated script are legitimate because you've done some research. If you're using it to locate papers that you then go and read, is that information false? I think you'd be able to find it out by whether or not the papers exist and whether they have the information you're looking for. He says he uses it for notes. He says the script ended up AI-generated sounding. Could some of that also be contributed to by the fact that he's been talking to LLMs to a concerning degree to his friends and family? In the same way that if your best friend says slay a bunch, suddenly you're also saying slay? I'm not entirely sure. I think based off of these accounts that him putting out AI-generated information rather than just AI-generated scripts is less likely. And of course, you can only take them at their word. Of course, if he was doing something else that he didn't say in these statements, that we wouldn't know about it. However, that is not to say that this is not a massive breach of trust for a lot of the people who have enjoyed Hank's content over the years. I don't think I'm alone in saying that generative AI is a scourge upon the land. Using AI at all is bad for the planet and bad for our brains. I think it's going to make the value of a college degree decline. I think it's going to make it a lot harder for people in the workforce.
Not to mention the fact that the amount of misinformation that has been spread via AI and will continue to be spread via AI on the internet is probably going to make it so that we question whether anything is true ever again. Or the pure and simple ethical issues for how these LLMs were trained in the first place, scraping and stealing people's information, the destroying of books, all of that.
People are way too emotionally reliant on their AIs. You have every right to feel betrayed by Hank Green for having done this. When he seems like maximum good guy, he and I are gonna have all the same beliefs on all the same stuff. And the reason I made my video initially was because I understand how this happens. I understand how people, whether in a vulnerable state or just curious about something's capabilities, get drawn in by these LLMs that have been designed to complement us into oblivion so that we're emotionally dependent on them. And then you're addicted to it. And just because you're a smart person doesn't mean you're immune to that kind of behavior. In fact, it might even be more likely that you're going to fall for it because of thinking you're too smart to be fooled. You are not immune to propaganda or ChatGPT. I have seen people in my personal life who have regular conversations with ChatGPT, and while I have my own thoughts about that, I see the comfort it brings them.
Which doesn't suddenly make using it good, it just makes things complicated. In the same way that elderly people using the emergency services system in order to talk to people more frequently by going to the hospital, is this a good thing? No. Is it a strain on our resources? Yeah. Do I understand how it happens? Also, yeah.
It's like a slot machine. And just because you think you're too smart to be fooled doesn't mean that that's true. I mean, I knew people in high school who were like, I would never be addicted to nicotine, and then immediately couldn't stop smoking once they started. Don't smoke cigarettes, kids. And so do I think knitters had a sort of inside eye to things being not right that could have been attributed to AI even back then? No. I think that knitters were very frustrated with seeing this come out, and we're on the front end of this sort of wide range of backlash he's been receiving both then and now. Ultimately, as I think we've talked about, there are a lot of aspects of these specific situations that people tend to tweak in their heads to sound worse, specifically for Hank Green. Not to say that he's not culpable or worthy of criticism for these situations, but truly, I think that the only way to avoid falling into this pit is to avoid these LLMs entirely, even though everyone and their mother is telling you that it's the new wave of technology and you're going to be left behind. You're not going to be left behind. Do I think Hank Green is immune to criticism over using AI at all, let alone for creating content that potentially has false information due to using AI? Of course not. Of course he's not immune from criticism, and I think he would agree. So I'm glad ultimately that Hank Green is able to recognize this problem and to step away for the sake of his own brain. And I hope that if he comes back, that he's able to talk openly about how he got here, because I think that it would be very relatable to a lot of people, unfortunately, but could also help us to understand the people in our own lives who have fallen down that rabbit hole. Get out there, have some nuance, and let me know what you think about all this in the comments down below. And subscribe for more content like this.